it is not entirely out of the realm possibility that a couple bounces don't go KU's way. Maybe there's some injuries here or there, and you could be looking at another season where Kansas misses a bowl game. Obviously, I hope that doesn't happen, but it's not out of the realm possibility by any means. It doesn't take that much imagination to envision a world where that happens. But it doesn't take that much imagination to envision a world where Kansas goes 8-4, 9-3. Pay heed, all who enter, and beware of this podcast. That's right. This is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, and of course, I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. We're back again to wrap up our final preview show of the 2025 season ahead of fall camp. We're going to be talking about KU's last three opponents. We had a great episode yesterday talking about what I think is the most critical stretch of the season for KU and the games 7, 8, and 9, specifically with Texas Tech and Kansas State. So if you want to hear a little bit more conversation on those games, I highly encourage you to check that out. Check out any of our previous shows talking about the previous games before that, the non-conference slate, the Missouri game. Obviously, it was a big talking point as well. So you can catch any of those previous discussions on any of our previous shows on our feed on Apple, Spotify, or on our YouTube channel. And speaking of our feed on Apple and Spotify and YouTube, you should absolutely be subscribed if you have not already, because we are about to be kicking off a bonanza of content coming up on our show here, both on audio and on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. Fall camp is about to be getting underway, so we are going to be pumping out lots of videos, lots of audio, lots of content for you to consume about KU football heading into the season. And on that note, Kevin, we talk about fall camp. We're recording this on Tuesday for a Wednesday release, and then on Thursday, fall camp's going to start for Kansas. And for some KU fans, you may think that seems a little early, right? I mean, we're still in July.
Yeah.
Well, that's because Kansas is, of course, playing in week 0 against Fresno State. And so because they're playing in week 0, you basically get to start a little bit earlier than other programs would that are not playing in week 0 and are going to be playing in week 1. And Lance Leipold has made several comments about that, I think, over the course of spring, about the fact that he really likes that because you get your team on the field sooner, you get your guys, back together sooner from summer workouts, whatever they may have been doing, you come together quicker and you can sort of hit the ground running. And I think really from the football side of it, Kevin, from the football coach perspective, I think a lot of it is, hey, also you get a chance to get these guys even more so before classes start, right? Where maybe their attention might be a little bit divided as you get closer to the start of both the season and, of course, of school as well. So you get them back in sort of a more isolated summer environment still with an additional week fall camp. So that's why it's going to be starting a little bit earlier, because Kansas has that week 0 game against Fresno State. It also affords Kansas essentially an extra bye week in their regular schedule.
Yeah, for sure. And when you look at the way that this team is constructed, there are still a lot of position battles that need to shake out. And so I think that makes this camp, maybe more interesting to watch than camp a year ago. I mean, this is a staff that has prided themselves all along about, hey, every spot is up for grabs. But when you have guys that have that much tenure, that have been starting for multiple years, I think it does feel a little bit different, even if the players say, hey, I feel like I've got every shot to win this job. When Devin Neal's in front of you might not feel like that on your inside, even if the competition is good. Well, in this case, Nick, there are so many jobs that are up for grabs. And so I think that makes this camp really fascinating. They get to start earlier. Like you mentioned, they ended spring earlier to kind of get a longer time, I think, in the weight room and conditioning with these guys after the spring ended and before the start of fall camp. And so I'm really interested to see what guys look like. We had a chance to go to a couple of the camps and kind of see some of the players, walking around or whatever else. And it's always interesting to see which guys have kind of taken up Gildersleeve at his word and have put in really strong off seasons, because this is a team that I think has, and we're going to talk about it here in a little bit, they've got sort of a wide range of outcomes, and the way that they approach this off season, the way that they approach camp could tell a lot about how this season is going to shake out.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned some of the position battle stuff because
Yeah.
I got the sense really throughout the spring that excited Lance Leipold, that excited the rest of the coaching staff. See what some of the positional coaches you talked to about going into last season, as you kind of mentioned, with so many guys that had been playing for so long at Kansas, right? You think specifically on the offensive side of the ball, if you were a young receiver, you knew it was going to be those three guys in front of you. If you were a Harry Stewart or Johnny Thompson, you knew it was going to be Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw in front of you. You look at the defensive side of the ball, kind of the same deal, right? There was a lot of really tenured players that were really solidified in their positions. And going into the spring and now, of course, into fall camp, that's not the case this season. There is a lot of opportunity for competition. And I think this coaching staff really prefers it that way and likes it that way, that you can use that to push two guys, right? I love hearing Lance Leipold talk about this and other coaches talk about it as well. But, the thought process of if you have a position battle with two guys and one guy is better than the other, but the other guy is pushing, guy A, let's say, who is maybe the better player, so to speak, but guy B is pushing him. Well, now you just made both players better, right? Because guy A is going to be working that much harder to be better, and now everybody wins. You're going to have a better starter, and if for whatever reason there's injury or whatever, when you do rotations on the defensive line, for example, whatever, everybody's better in that scenario. So it's obvious how important that aspect of it is. And I don't know, Kevin, that Lance Leipold or any of the other coaches would outwardly say this publicly, but I do wonder if they consider that going into last season, if that maybe did contribute a little bit to some of the struggles that Kansas had, and that there were so many guys that, for lack of a better term, felt comfortable in their position, didn't really feel challenged in the offseason of their status in terms of, hey, I know I'm going to get X number of snaps per game. I know I'm going to be, out there all the time. And maybe that hurt KU a little bit. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. I don't think any coaches would publicly admit that, but I just wonder if that factored in a little bit in some cases.
Well, you mentioned competition making both guys better. Lack of competition makes both guys worse. And whether or not you have a great locker room, and we've talked about it on this show, Nick, KU has terrific culture in football. And I think that really showed last year with so many things going wrong, and the way that they were able to sort of rehone, refocus, and still end the year playing their best football to get the 3 ranked wins back to back to back was a really nice sort of indication that, hey, nobody quit at any point in this, in the way that it went. At the same time, even within that culture, if you're a starter and you're head and shoulders above and you're not getting pushed, then you're not being the best version that you can be. And that, coaches push players try and push themselves, but I think competition is a natural pusher. And when you don't have that, it's not just the guy who's not getting pushed, the guy who's not pushing him too. It's really easy for him to not get better because he doesn't feel like, okay, if I'm the cornerback behind it, and Jalen Todd did a terrific job last year, despite the fact that we knew heading in, hey, it's Kobe and Melo. And I think he really put in a lot of work. But just generally speaking, if you've got Kobe and Melo there, they're starting, and that you're not going to, it's really easy for that guy to be comfortable in his position. Like, okay, they're not going to need me to lock down the other team's number one best wide receiver. That's Melo Dawson, or that's Kobe. That's not going to be something that's going to fall onto me. And I think when you look at some of the younger guys that broke out last year that you started to see, whether it's Blake Harrell, whether it's Jalen Todd, whether it's Taylor Davis, guys who maybe even circumstances or injuries or whatever kind of facilitated some of that. I think generally speaking, that was why you saw those guys pop, even with the guys in front of them, was they were pushing and they were competing and all of those things. But I think, to your point, this year, and again, like you said, you hear Lance Leipold talk about it, and you can almost see the twinkle in his eye when he's talking about guys are really competing, and you get the feeling that he kind of likes a team that's going to push itself to get better and better.
Well, let me ask you this. Heading into this year's specific fall camp, I mean, how realistic is it? Or maybe are there players you're keeping an eye on in terms of hey, this guy, if he does have a great fall camp, maybe he's on the 2 deep. Maybe he's pushing for a starting job versus maybe where he's at right now. Like, I guess, for the average fan, how much can essentially a month, which is what you basically have for fall camp, how much realistically can a player improve himself in that span to where he is somebody who's maybe getting on the field versus at the start of the fall camp, he wasn't necessarily going to be that guy?
Oh, a ton. It really can. And I think, coaches get a feeling through the off season and through conditioning a lot of times of, hey, this guy might be ready to pop. He's putting in the work. He's somebody that maybe in the spring, like you said, wasn't on the 2 deep or was buried a little bit. But let's just throw out an example or a name or whatever. A guy like an Austin Alexander or somebody like that is a young guy. If he put together all of the off season or conditioning or strength or however you want to put it, and then goes into the fall, he's still not on the 2 deep. If Austin plays really well, if he comes out, he does everything they ask of him, he's doing the right things. You have, I think, usually about 3 scrimmages or so before you have that first game. If you play through there and they look at you and say, okay, this is a guy that has taken that next step, you absolutely can propel yourself from being off the radar onto the radar. And I think that applies for some starting spots. You can go from, hey, off the depth chart and we're looking for a guy who's going to start at this position. You can be that guy, but you can also be somebody that maybe your time just speeds up. Maybe they're looking at you like, hey, you're a guy that might play for us as a sophomore or junior. Well, you're a redshirt freshman. You come in, you have a big camp, and they're saying, okay, we got to play John Kamara right now or whoever it is.
When I look at this fall camp, as you said, there is a lot of competition, and there's starting spots that are a bit unclear heading into fall camp. Yep. And so some of what you outlined is very plausible. You look at the offensive line, where I think you could say at this point there's probably 2 starting positions available up for grabs on the offensive line. You look at the wide receiver room. I think we expect Emmanuel Henderson to be probably one of the top guys, but like, would it be shocking if number 2 is Bryson Canty or Levi Wentz or Campe? Like, there's going to be a lot of competition in there to determine who's going to be those guys that are going to be on the field more. You look at the defense, obviously some intrigue at the linebacker spot with the transfers that they brought in and how they will fare. You look in the secondary, there's a ton of names that could really pop. You mentioned Austin Alexander. You look at the safety room, Kevin. I mean, there's 4 or 5 different safeties that I think you could make the argument if they have a strong fall camp. You could say maybe that guy's starting week 0 against Fresno State. So there are a lot of different positions up for grabs, and we're certainly excited about giving them a chance to get out there and see some of these guys in action a little bit at fall camp. We're certainly going to be talking about it. If you're listening to this on Wednesday, be on the lookout on Thursday afternoon. We're going to be dropping a show reacting to the first day of fall camp. Going to have a chance to hear from Lance Leipold and a couple of players as well. So you'll want to be on the lookout for that on Thursday afternoon. And you'll also want to follow us on social media at Paid KCSN on Twitter. We're going to have a chance to get out there and maybe get some pictures and video of some of the guys in action. So you'll absolutely want to stay plugged in and find out all that good stuff that's happening over the course of fall camp. Let's go ahead and shift gears here. We'll head over to the rest of our final 2025 season preview. We're talking about the final 3 games of the season: Iowa State, Arizona, and Utah. We'll dive into that coming up next. Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
Success in real estate takes more than vision. It takes the right financial partner. When someone takes something rundown and turns it into something great, that's called a comeback story, like Brain Group. They take distressed properties here in KC, completely rework them, and then turn them into valuable real estate. But that kind of work needs the right bank behind it. Enter Emprise Bank. They're not about cookie-cutter loans. They saw Brain Group's vision, backed them, and now they're making big moves in Kansas City real estate. Talk about your partner in possible. Emprise doesn't do one-size-fits-all financing. They invest in potential and back growth. Visit emprisebank.com/KC to learn more. Emprise Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
Folks, there's nothing that beats relaxing on a hot summer day and watching some baseball. And there's no simpler way to get in on the action than by downloading the Pick 6 app from DraftKings. It's crazy simple. Just pick more or less on the stats for 2 or more of your favorite players, and boom, you're in the mix for big cash prizes. And the best part, Pick 6 is available right here in Missouri. Don't miss out on the fun. Don't settle for a smaller payout. Switch to Pick 6, and right now, new customers can get $25 in bonus picks with their first deposit of $5. Here's what you got to do. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code KCSN. That's code KCSN for new customers to get $25 in bonus picks with their first deposit of $5. Better payouts, bigger wins, only with Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Void where prohibited. New customers only. Minimum $5 deposit. Bonus picks expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer along with Kevin Flaherty. Okay, let's wrap up our pre-fall camp season preview here with the last 3 games of the season. Up to this point, as a reminder of our predictions so far this season, Kevin, you have Kansas at 7-2 at this juncture of the season with losses against Kansas State and Texas Tech. I have Kansas at 6-3 with losses against Missouri, UCF, and Texas Tech. So that's where we sit right now. Both of us have Kansas already being bowl eligible at this point in the season, which would be really nice if it does indeed play out that way. And I mentioned, with our last show talking about the Texas Tech, K-State, and Oklahoma State games, how I felt that was the most critical stretch of the season for Kansas. Well, depending on how the season plays out, these last 3 games could be equally as important for Kansas in a wide variety of ways, because you're talking about 2 opponents, I think with Iowa State and Utah, that you could easily find yourself talking about them being in the Big 12 title conversation. Obviously, as we talk about Kansas here, with you, Kevin, having Kansas at 7-2, I'm sure that's going to be putting Kansas right in the Big 12 title conversation. So we're talking about the potential for some really big games that could have significant implications on who goes to Arlington potentially down the stretch here for Kansas. So let's start with Iowa State, who is KU's 10th game of the season. KU's going to be playing Iowa State coming off of a bye. They're going to play Arizona, I got it mixed up. Arizona's first. My apologies. Arizona is the 10th game. I got it a little bit backwards. I got so excited to talk about Iowa State, I almost glossed over Arizona. So KU's going to play Oklahoma State, November 1st. Then they will go at Arizona on November 8th. That is their next game on the schedule when they are 6-3. And Arizona, Kevin, is a team that, I mean, if it wasn't for Utah, they'd probably be the most disappointing team in the Big 12 last year. Considering Noah Fifita and his talent, you had a top 5-ish NFL draft pick at wide receiver in Ted McMillan. You had Brett Brennan, who I think was an exciting new head coach, come in, and they really just fell flat. They were pretty bad across the board, truthfully, last season. Miraculously, they managed to keep Noah Fifita on the roster. He's a guy that I think, considering how the season went last year, you would expect him to hit the transfer portal, but they managed to keep him, so he is back. That's good news for Arizona. They do lose McMillan, though, obviously, to the NFL draft. So when you look at this Arizona team, Kevin, I guess first off, where do you think they might be at this point in the season? Could this be a team where they've already packed it in for the year if they get off to another bad start in 2025? And what maybe worries you about the potential for Arizona in this matchup against Kansas?
Yeah, you got to throw Oklahoma State into that group too of the most disappointing teams. But yeah, Arizona was really bad last year, and I'm not saying that to insult.
Hey, there goes all of our Arizona fans, Kevin. Every Arizona fan that we had listening. I'm gonna have to issue another apology. I already had to apologize to the Wagner fans. Now I'm gonna have to apologize to the Arizona fans too.
These shows just get us crushed. But you look at Arizona specifically, and you mentioned Utah and being disappointing. Utah was really close to not having such a disappointing season, right? There were a lot of close games in there that could have gone either way. Not a lot of people realize this. If you look at like SP Plus, which we've talked about is one of ESPN's sort of advanced metrics, Utah was better than KU was last year. And so it was one of those where both KU and Utah had a lot of really close games that went the other way. Arizona, not so much. When you look at that team, they actually played 10 games against Big 12 teams. Because remember, they had, was it the K-State game that was like against a conference opponent, but not a conference game?
Which, by the way, it'll be the same thing again this year. K-State, Arizona play again this year, and I believe it's going to be considered a non-conference game because it was a home and home that they scheduled before Arizona joined the Big 12. So they've kept it, but it's non-conference, which I like. Of all the things that of all the the things that make no sense in college athletics, this is one of them where it's like this really makes no sense. But I guess let them do their thing.
Out of the 10 games against Big 12 teams, we'll go ahead and throw the K-State game in there because it was against Big 12 competition. Arizona lost 8 of them, 6 by double digits. And so it wasn't one of those things where you look at it and you say, oh, they had so many close calls. And no, this was a team that was not very good, Nick. And when you look at starting the year 3-1 and then having kind of that go down the stretch, you finished 90th offensively in SP+. Defensively, you were better at 84th. I mean, you weren't good on either side of the ball. And they did wind up making a coaching change, Seth Daggy in from Marshall to run the offense. But overall, I mean, I think a lot of people across the Big 12 came out of this game sort of questioning Brent Brennan and the direction of where they were at previously under Jed Fish. Of course, he goes to Washington. Brennan comes in, and immediately you have a flop. And when you look at that roster, you say, well, gosh, like how did they flop that hard? And I think that's the tricky thing about Arizona for this season is I think Daggy's probably going to make the offense a little bit better. You mentioned Fafita is a really good quarterback. He's got a really good target to throw to, and some guy named Kean Burnett that KU fans may be slightly familiar with at tight end. You bring in, Chris Hudson from Washington State as a wide receiver is pretty good. I think the offense should take a step forward under Daggy and with the tools that he's got there. Defensively, though, I don't know that Arizona is going to be able to keep up with a lot of teams in the Big 12 this year. And I don't know that offensively they're going to improve enough to even be up there with some of the teams that you think about being sort of a great offense, not so great defense Big 12 team. And so I don't know about you, Nick. I think Arizona, I don't want to say they're in last place in the Big 12 or anything like that, but you look at the 4 or 5 teams that you kind of maybe have in that, 12 to 16 range. I struggle to see a scenario where Arizona isn't one of those teams this year.
Yeah, I tend to agree. They are pretty much consensus considered to be a bottom 3 or 4 team in the Big 12. Now, if you're an Arizona fan, hey, Arizona State, your brethren out there picked finish last, and they ended up winning the damn thing last year. So there is that. But I agree with you on the sense that I struggle to see where this team, Arizona, is going to be that much better because you look at the offense. You mentioned Seth Daggy coming in, who is sort of a Mike Leach coaching tree guy. And so he's going to try to bring in a different style of offense. But the problem, Kevin, I have with that is you're basically going to be relying on Noah Fafita to be the catalyst for your offense. And you kind of did that last year. And, oh, by the way, you had a top 5 NFL draft pick receiver and it didn't work. So it's like, okay, like is Fafita really going to, be that much better this year with probably not as good of collective weapons around him this season compared to what he was in 2024. So that's my first issue. And then you mentioned the defense, and the defense was bad. They also had a lot of injuries, but they had some guys transfer out as well. So yeah, same deal. I don't know how great their defense is going to be again this year either. When you look at their schedule, they'll be coming off of back-to-back road games against Houston and Colorado before they play Kansas. Again, I mean, this could easily be a situation, Kevin, where Arizona is 2-6 and, are they going to have much of a home field environment at that point? Like,
I know Colorado does not play KU this year, but could it be time for the Julian Lewis era at that point? Like in terms of the this just absolute stud freshman quarterback they got. They brought in Caden Salter too, but could they get to a point at about midseason where they turn the keys over and say, hey, it's the young guys' chance? I'm really interested to see where Colorado is at by the time they're playing Arizona, because I think that Colorado is such a fascinating program anyway, because of the way that they recruit through the portal and the way that they build that program and everything else. But I think Colorado is going to drop off from where they were last year. But at the same time, I don't know that I feel great about Arizona going to Boulder either. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, truthfully, for Arizona, their Big 12 conference schedule prior to Kansas is not that difficult. They get Oklahoma State at home, they get BYU at home, but then they do have those 2 games at Houston and at Colorado, which I know you are probably higher than most on Houston, I would say, but I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to the reality that Houston is potentially building towards something, right?
Yeah.
So that's probably going to be a tough game for them, but their conference schedule, I guess, is not that difficult. Now they do start conference play at Iowa State. They have that K-State game again that is a conference non-conference game. So yeah, you throw that in there as well, but yeah, I don't know. But I think you and I seemingly both agree that we don't expect Arizona to be the cream of the crop of the Big 12 in 2025. So if you are Kansas heading on the road in this game, what's your prediction here, Kevin? You've got Kansas at 7-2. I've got them at 6-3. Are they going to Tucson? Are they getting a win? What's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think they're getting a win. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, even with me predicting Arizona to struggle, because it is going to be a road game coming up, right after the Oklahoma State game, like you mentioned. This could be one of those games where people are kind of biting their fingernails a little bit, because it's 20-13 in the fourth quarter or something like that. But at the same time, I like Kansas to go and get a road win in this one. It's an Arizona team that I think we're going to have a much better idea about Brent Brennan after this year. I think, a lot of people took a lot of shots at him last year after they really failed to meet expectations, but we'll kind of have a better idea about what he's about, what this program's about, I think, after this year. Ultimately, though, I like Kansas to get a road win here. How about you?
If there is a potential for a game on KU's schedule to be considered a trap game, this one could be it. And here's why. As we just talked about, it's very possible that Arizona could be coming into this game with maybe only 2 or 3 wins on the year. We, of course, have both predicted Kansas to be at this point on the positive side of bowl eligibility. I'm at 6-3, with you at 7-2. As I mentioned, sort of to start to kick this whole conversation off, it is very possible that if Kansas, let's go with you here, Kevin, here with the optimistic picks. If Kansas is 7-2 heading into a game like this, and with Iowa State on the horizon as a team that probably is also going to be in a similar position, this could be a game where it is potentially a trap game for Kansas, if it kind of unfolds in that way. And that worries me a little bit, but I do think this one is one that I'm going to pick Kansas as well. But again, I would say with a little bit of a caution here that this one could be much trickier depending on the situation when we get to that point in the season. Because Arizona could be playing free. They could be really playing for nothing. And, when you have a team like that, Kevin, that's playing for nothing, it could go either way. They could just be totally dead, or they could just come out and play loose and play really well. And then obviously on the Kansas side, again, you could be talking about a Kansas team that if we look at the positive potential for KU, they could be looking at a matchup against Iowa State to maybe even determine their fates in the Big 12 title race in their next game. So that is where I'm a little bit cautious on this one, but I'll pick Kansas. I think Kansas will win. I'll say Kansas wins 31-17 is my prediction.
Yeah, I like that pick. I think it is the sort of thing where it would be, given your score line, it would maybe even be 24-17 with 8 minutes left or 7 minutes left, and then Kansas kind of tacks on that insurance score to win by a couple. I like the Jayhawks to win this one. I think that Oklahoma State game and this one are the 2 games that kind of jump out the most as potential trap games. I mean, the Oklahoma State game being the week after K-State, one way or another, whether you win that game or you lose that game, I think there's a little bit of of potential for trap there. Also, like you said, Arizona coming in after a game against Colorado and Boulder. Who knows what Colorado will have at that point? If Arizona wins against Colorado at that point, you could have, say, a 3-win Arizona team that you're looking at. Oh, it's a 3-win Arizona team, but they just built some confidence by beating Colorado at Boulder the previous week. And so I could see that trap game aspect for this one too.
The one positive, I think, for Kansas with the whole trap game discussion when it comes to this game against Arizona State is against Arizona, they do have a bye. They have a bye after this game. So maybe that helps mitigate a little bit some of that conversation about, oh, you're looking ahead to a big game against Iowa State next week. Like, you're looking ahead. Like, there is going to be a bye for KU after this game. So maybe that helps kind of eliminate that a little bit, but it is still something to consider. So like I said, they do have a bye, and then I got a little ahead of myself earlier in the episode. Then they prepare for that trip to Ames. We'll talk about that, and we'll also talk about the season finale for Kansas against Utah. We'll take one more quick break, and we'll do all that coming up next.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. Of course, we're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. If you have not already, please subscribe, Apple, Spotify, and over on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. Give us a follow at Paid KCSN. You can follow Kevin at K Flaherty KCSN, myself at Nick Springer 29 as well for more content, as we're going to be getting out to fall camp tomorrow on Thursday. If you're listening to this episode on Wednesday afternoon, we'll be getting out on Thursday. So be on the lookout on Thursday afternoon for our day one fall camp reactions. We'll hear from Lance Leipold, hear from some players as well. And then you'll absolutely want to stay subscribed and keep those notification settings on for all of the great content that we have planned coming out over the course of fall camp, including interviews with players, coaches, and much more. And of course, our thoughts as things unfold as well. Let's continue with our last two games of the 2025 season. We both predicted a win for Kansas against Arizona. So heading into the final two games of the season, that puts you, Kevin, with Kansas at 8-2. I have Kansas now at 7-3. Before another big game for KU, they're going to go on the road back to Ames, Iowa, to play the Iowa State Cyclones. It's a late November game. I can already feel it tingling inside me. It's going to be 15 degrees. There's probably going to be a strong winds, may even be some snow in this one up in Ames. So conditions may be something to consider as well when we start talking about this game. But Iowa State, Kevin, is an intriguing team once again. You know, Iowa State for so many years under Matt Campbell has been a team that, and it just feels like so many years they've been right there, but they've never been able to get over the hump. And they've obviously had some disappointing years as well. But they have arguably their best quarterback coming into 2025 that they've had in quite a while. I mean, I know they had Brock Purdy, but he had some bad seasons in his last couple of years. Rocco Becht, on the other hand, is a guy that looks like he's stepping into being a really good quarterback at Iowa State, and he's going to be back again this season. I think he's already on track to maybe be one of Iowa State's best-ranked quarterbacks in terms of passing yards and touchdowns if he has another strong season this year in 2025. So he's going to be leading the way for that Iowa State offense. They brought back a ton on their offensive line. They brought back both their two top running backs with Carson Hansen and Abu Sama. They did lose quite a bit from their receiver room, but they went in the transfer portal as Kansas did, brought in some players. So this is a game that scares me, Kevin. I wonder what your initial read is on this one late in November in Ames.
Yeah, and Kansas is riding a 3-game winning streak against Iowa State right now. And you look at Rocco Becht, you mentioned, if he throws for 3,000 yards this year, which I would, I don't want to say bet, but I would guess that he does, he will have thrown for 3,000 yards in 3 straight seasons. So obviously a terrific quarterback. You mentioned the wide receiver room getting better through the transfer portal, going out and adding, Chase Soule was the higher rated guy, the 4-star transfer from ECU. Also Xavier Townsend, jumping from one Big 12 school to another one. He came over from UCF. And so they've got some receivers. It's Iowa State, so they've got like 35 tight ends that can catch the football. The thing that's been interesting about Iowa State, kind of sticking with the offense like we have been here, Nick, the offensive line in the running game, I feel like haven't quite been as up to snuff. And I know Hansen ran for 700 some yards last year. I know Sama's had some big games, including in Manhattan, 2 years ago. But overall, I feel like up front on the offensive line, they haven't moved guys around like some of the more physical teams in the Big 12 have. And while their running backs are good, I don't know that Iowa State's running game scares you as much as some of the other teams in the conference.
Yeah, I do get the sense that they can be very hot and cold with their run game. I think we've seen in some games, the game that jumps to my mind is you go back to that snow game they had against Kansas State where they ran for like 19 billion yards.
Sama is still scoring at Manhattan, right?
Exactly. So they've had some games where the run game has really powered them, but it has been sort of on and off, right? I wouldn't call it really consistent. And Kansas, to their credit, has done a great job against Iowa State's ground game over the course of their 3 victories. In fact, the Kansas defense has been really good, Kevin, over the course of beating Iowa State 3 times in a row. You go back to when they beat them in Lawrence all the way back in 2022. You think about that game where they completely shut down the Iowa State offense pretty much in totality. You look at the game they had last in 3 with Jason Bean and what he did and what the defense was able to do in that game as well. So there is a pattern of success for the KU defense against this Iowa State offense. Obviously, we'll see with DK McDonald taking over the reins. I wonder if he's taking more notes from Brian Borland when it comes to playing against Iowa State. So that'll be something to keep in mind. But yeah, I expect the offense, regardless, to be pretty strong. I certainly, I think, along with other people 2 years ago, had many doubts about Rocco Becht and what kind of quarterback he could be. And I think he's proved me wrong. I think he's proved a lot of people wrong. And he's certainly a quality quarterback. And again, I think Iowa State is a team that when you look at their schedule, they could be rolling into this game with potentially maybe 1 or 2 losses in conference play. So again, just to underline what the significance of this game could be if it is, 2 top 25 teams, 2 teams with only a couple losses in conference play each, fighting late in the season for potentially a shot at the Big 12 title game. You look at Arizona, you look at Iowa State's conference schedule, Kevin, and they're going to have a game at Cincinnati early in their conference play, but they go at Colorado State or at Colorado, but they get Arizona State at home, they get BYU at home, they'll be at TCU. So their schedule, I think, is favorable for them to be potentially coming in with only a handful of conference losses, which could add to the magnitude of this particular game. One other quick note is just like the K-State game, both teams are going to be coming off a bye. Kansas will be off a bye. Iowa State will be off a bye as well. They're going to play at TCU on November 8th, and they have a bye before that November 22nd game against Kansas. So that's something to consider as well. I guess sort of a level playing field from that perspective. When you look at this Iowa State defense, Kevin, what jumps out to you? I know they had a lot of injuries, especially at the linebacker position.
A ton of injuries last year, yeah. And that was the thing about the game last year against Kansas is Kansas has usually done a pretty good job of holding down Iowa State's offense. Iowa State has usually done a pretty good job of mostly holding down Kansas's offense and particularly the running game. And when you look at the way KU was able to run the ball last year, and then KU's offense, just about everything it did seemed to click a year ago against Iowa State. I think a lot of that was Iowa State wearing down, not having a whole lot of healthy guys. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying KU doesn't deserve credit, but I don't think that that's what we can sit here and say, oh, that's Iowa State's defense. KU's going to throw up another 45 burger in this one. Rocco Becht threw for 383 last year against KU. So you had a little bit more offense on both sides. One of the things that does stand out to me, though, Nick, on this defense, one, John Haycock is probably the best DC in the Big 12. And he's a guy that really, for those of you that don't follow sort of football X's and O's, he's a guy that does a great job with defending spread offenses and was somebody that NFL teams were coming in to visit, Ames to see what Iowa State was doing in terms of defending all these spread offenses with, lesser talent. And I think a couple things have happened. Haycock has continued to be a great DC and continues to have some great answers for spread offenses. But I think even beyond that, Nick, they've started getting more talented on defense. I think when you look at that group on Iowa State's defense this year, I think it is a pretty talented group. And it's funny because I say that thinking that it was heading that way 3 or 4 years ago, because 4 of their starters are for Kansas City. And so they were guys that, I remember seeing in high school and thinking, man, like that's a really good get for Iowa State. And so when you look at Dominique Orange being sort of that prototypical, likely NFL nose tackle, when you look at the defensive line guys and some of the depth they have there, they brought in another defensive lineman from BYU who kind of really seems to fit what they do. That linebacker group, like you said, being healthy, having Carson Willich, having Caleb Bacon, and all the guys that go there. And then secondary wise, they've got some dudes on the back end. And I think, when you look at it's the Big 12's best defensive backs and you pick, say, the best 10 defensive backs, 2 or 3 of those guys by the end of the year might be wearing Cyclone jerseys. And so I think defensively, if Iowa State can stay healthy, and I do think they're a little deeper this year defensively than they were a year ago, I would expect this defense to kind of return to one of Haycock's, top 20, top 25 type defenses.
That was a good call out, by the way, of what Rocco Beck did last year against Kansas. I kind of forgot about that, truthfully. I mentioned KU's defense kind of shutting down Iowa State. That wasn't really the case last year, actually.
Shut down Iowa State's run game, yeah. I mean, I think Iowa State averaged like 3.3 yards a carry or something like that. But Beck had a really good game. And fortunately, he did it throwing the ball to Noel and Higgins, who are, in the NFL now. But the flip side of that is Beck is back, and like we talked about, they did fill those holes pretty well in the transfer portal.
Yeah, and then you mentioned Jeremiah Cooper, I think is probably the name that jumps out the most in their secondary as a real impact guy. So that's going to be something to watch as well. Is this a game where maybe with the weather conditions, what they could be, late November in Ames, plus some of the elite defense from both teams? I'll say this, I'm not going to predict a 45-36 scoreline for this game this year. But speaking of that, what do you think in this one, Kevin? On the road in Ames, Kansas on a 3-game win streak. Do they make it 4 this season against Iowa State?
Yeah, I think Iowa State's got more corners this year too, with Jontez Williams, Trey Bell, Benny Ngoyi. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, I apologize. And so I think Iowa State's defense is going to be significantly better. And I bring that up because I think that as good as Kansas's offense is in a cold game in Ames with that defense and everything, I think Iowa State is going to be able to keep Kansas from running away offensively the way that it did a year ago. Kansas has the winning streak. Kansas has, played pretty well against Iowa State, and Kansas has played pretty well coming off of buys, as we've talked about it, and it feels like every single episode so far. At the same time, it's one of those things where it's sort of the all streaks must come to an end type of thing. I just think this Iowa State team is going to be really good. I think Rocco Beck is going to give them enough offense in this one, and I really like Iowa State's defense if they're able to stay healthy. And again, like you said, with them coming off a bye week, those guys are probably going to be pretty fresh. And so this is another, for me, maybe one of those coin flip games or a game that goes 52-48 where there's not a whole lot of separation to me. Ultimately, I do think Iowa State takes this one, and I think in my records now, Kansas drops to 8-3.
Yeah, coin flip is the exact term that I was thinking in my brain as I looked at this game. Right, I mean, I think this game and I think K-State, which we talked about earlier, those 2 games particularly are the 2 games, and I think Utah, we'll talk about next, are the most difficult games to predict this season in what the outcome will be. For a lot of the reasons that you outlined. And the other thing is I'm kind of going to work myself into a little bit of a mental pretzel here, Kevin, because, I think about Matt Campbell and how he tends to kind of really struggle coaching wise in close games, right? Like he kind of has a bit of a track record, a bit of a history of crumbling late in games if it's a tight game, right? So, and I kind of think this will be a tight game. I don't see either team really creating a lot of separation. You go back to the game in 2023 that Kansas won at Ames. Part of it was Kansas did create some separation in that game on the scoreboard. So I wonder if they'll be able to do that again in this game against Iowa State, as you mentioned with the Iowa State defense. But again, like I said, on the flip side, I'm thinking, if it's a close game, I think Matt Campbell will screw something up, and that should give the favor back to Kansas. So I don't know. I think I will pick Iowa State, though, for a lot of the similar reasons that you laid out. It's going to be a really tough environment. We're going to be talking about potentially two teams battling for position in the hunt for the Big 12 title. It just feels like Iowa State will probably get this one done and break that 3-game win streak for Kansas. I'm not really sure how it's going to happen. Is a thing. This could be a hard-fought game.
I will say Iowa State did do better last year in close games. And so Matt Campbell, traditionally, you're absolutely right. It's kind of funny because you talk a lot about, and we've talked about this on the show, the Big 12 has so many one-score games. And most coaches, it tends to balance out, where if you win a lot of close games one year, you maybe aren't winning as many close games the next year. Nick Saban is one of the examples of guys who won an abnormal number of close games. If there's a close game, they were usually going to win it.
And Campbell's the opposite.
Matt Campbell was kind of the opposite, where he has really struggled in close games. And so, to your point, when you look at 2024 and look at the fact that Iowa State was better in close games, do you look at it as, hey, maybe they're getting better in close games, maybe Matt Campbell is getting better in close games? Or do you look at it and say, well, that's the outlier, and this year is going to maybe come back to earth a little bit? It's an interesting question, but I do think this is going to be a really close game.
I'm going to say Iowa State wins it, Kevin, 20-14.
Yeah,
is my score prediction. I think it'll be much lower scoring than what we saw at Arrowhead Stadium last year.
Could be a lot like the BYU game last year.
Yeah,
it was there just wasn't a lot of offense, and you felt like one play was going to be the difference either way. And of course, Jalen Daniels going out and winning that with his leg, not legs as in running, but with the punt.
True. Yeah, that expert pinpoint punt. Kevin, it's so hard in practice to teach a guy to run down and have it bounce off his head. Right? They practice it every day.
Execute it. Run the punt off the other guy play. It's pretty.
Yeah, I remember watching a clip from Jim Valvano, the late Jim Valvano, who was coach at NC State, and he made a joke about in the NCAA tournament when they went on to win the national championship, they had a game against UNLV where at the buzzer, a guy scored, basically UNLV had the rebound to win the game. They knocked it out of each other's hands and they scored. And the joke was, it's so hard to practice the opponent knocking the ball out of his own hands and scoring. But I felt like that's kind of the same premise of that play for Jalen Daniels against BYU. So we both have Iowa State taking this one, Kevin. So that puts Iowa State at 8-3 for you, 7-4 for me. Let's get to this last game of the season that KU has. They'll come back home to the booth to play against Utah in Lawrence. And this game, they don't do this very often, Kevin. This game already has a time and a TV. They're going to be they've already decided they're going to be putting this game on national television, either ABC or ESPN. It's going to be an 11 a.m. game on November 28th to wrap up the season. And Utah is another enigmatic team, I think, heading into 2025. Again, really struggled in 2024. You kind of talked about it earlier, though. Maybe not as bad as their record made it seem, or maybe perception-wise made it seem for them. And they went out and brought in Devin Dampier as their quarterback coming into this season from New Mexico. If you followed New Mexico at all, they were a very, very explosive offense. They scored a lot of points. Dampier was a big part of that. He had 19 rushing touchdowns, by the way, and ran for over 1,000 yards. Passing-wise, he was so-so. He had threw 12 interceptions, but did have 12 passing touchdowns as well. But so the question I think for Utah is how much better does Dampier become as a passer coming into the Big 12? And I'm sure by the end of the season we'll have a much better understanding of maybe where he's at. But this is still, to me at least, when I think of this Utah team, it's still going to be your prototypical Utah offense. And they're just going to ground and pound you and try to grind you up on the ground. They've got 2 tackles that both could be top 10 picks, I think, or top 15 picks in the NFL draft potentially. So I think they're just going to try to road grade you as much as they can, and we'll see how the Kansas defense is able to handle it. But what's your view of where Utah might be when they roll into Lawrence for the last game of the season?
Well, the other big part of that New Mexico offense is Jason Beck, the offensive coordinator, and now he's the offensive coordinator at Utah. So Utah brought over Dampier's coordinator and quarterbacks coach, so there's some familiarity there. Look, Nick, if Utah gets to a point where they just don't spike themselves offensively like they did last year, then they're probably going to be pretty good. When they played last year, I think they finished the season 16th in the country in defensive SP+. They have pieces defensively where it looks like, hey, they're probably going to be pretty physical and good on defense again. And so you really take a look at that offense and you look at the running backs that they got. They've got a good group of running backs, bringing in Wayshawn Parker from Washington State, where he ran for 735 yards. I think he's probably the back 1A, but they have enough guys that they could roll through like 4 of those guys behind that offensive line. And that offensive line is the strength of the team. You mentioned the offensive tackles. Obviously, when you have, Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu, it cures a lot of ills. And I think when you're a quarterback moving from one school to another, it probably adds a lot of confidence. And I think if Dampier can keep a hold on the turnovers, I think that's the one thing that could maybe, do Utah in, is even if he's not a super accurate passer, even if he's completing 55% of his throws, if he's not giving the ball to the other team, I think Utah will mostly be okay because of that offensive line, because of Dampier's legs, and because of those running backs and the defense that they have. I think, that would obviously limit their ceiling. I think if he's not good at throwing the ball, creating big plays in the passing game, maybe they're not a Big 12 title game contender. But I think if Dampier can just manage the game, and it's such a dirty phrase in football, right? Like everybody thinks of a game manager like a negative thing. It's like, no, you keep your team out of bad stuff. And if Dampier can manage the game, make plays with his legs, then Utah's going to be a really tough out, because I do think the running game and the defense are going to be really tough.
Yeah, and for Utah, Kevin, we may have a good sense of where they are in the hierarchy of the Big 12 pretty early in the season, because 2 of their first 3 conference games are Texas Tech and Arizona State.
Yeah.
So they are going to be tested early, and they also play K-State right before they play Kansas. So you're talking about starting conference play with 2 really, really tough opponents, and then before they play KU, they're going to be playing against Kansas State. So I think we'll have a pretty good idea of how legitimate they are as title contenders pretty early on in the season. And we'll see how much maybe that influences how they play over the course of the remainder of the season heading into this game against Kansas State. But yeah, I love everything you said about Dampier. I mean, he's obviously an electrifying player, and certainly his legs immediately jump out as a major red flag for Kansas, because as we've highlighted over the course of many shows at this point, KU has historically had issues with running quarterbacks. And so that is certainly something to keep in mind. But yeah, this is going to be another game where I look at the Utah defense and I think it could be another tough slog for Kansas. That's a very physical defense. I think Utah's going to make this a very physical game. And I think, Kevin, this is a game where if you were to play this game in week 3, it would have a different feeling than it does in week 15, the last game of the season. And what I mean by that is when you're playing an opponent that is going to try to be as physical as Utah is, and then on top of that, you've already played 11 games leading up to that game, that physicality takes on an even more of a, you feel it even more, essentially, if you've already been beating up your body for 11 games prior to it. So maybe that factors in as well and helps Utah a little bit. But this is one where I was also having a tough time really deciding on which way I was leaning. How are you feeling about it, Kevin? You have Kansas at 8-3. I have Kansas at 7-4. Are they going to finish the season with a win at home against Utah?
This is another tough one to pick, honestly. And I think when you look at that Utah defense, I think the defensive line looks really physical. Are they going to be able to get after Jalen Daniels? Because I think they, as physical as they are, I don't know that they necessarily have the speed and pursuit on the defensive line to keep Jalen from getting where he wants to go. Really good linebacking core. Lander Barton's terrific. And I think when you look at the safeties, I'm really interested. Smith Snowden being a nickelback is really good. Tao Johnson and Rabbit Evans being the safeties is a really, really good duo. And I think when you get down to it, this is going to be a game that's really going to depend on who's healthy, because I think, if it is, Dampier all year long, he's not throwing the ball super well. They're having to depend on his legs. He's taking shots all year long. Is he going to be the electric Devin Dampier by the time he gets to this point in the season? Similar to Jalen, if you're running option and doing all the things, how's Jalen feeling? How's Daniel Highshaw doing? How's your defense doing when you're going up against an offensive line like this? And I do like Kansas's defensive tackle depth and that group's ability to hold up over the course of the year. Ultimately, though, Nick, I think Utah has a chance to be one of the better teams in the Big 12. I see them bouncing back this year. They weren't that far off last year, and they weren't that far off last year despite having no offense. And so if Dampier can get the offense, not even back to being good, but just being average, being something that you aren't looking like you're, the best outcome is a punt, then I think that Utah has got a chance to win 8 or 9 games. Ultimately, we saw Kansas run out of gas against Baylor a year ago in the final game. It's been a little bit of a tough slate of games, and you played Iowa State in Ames right before this. And all of that is to say, I think I'm going to go with Utah in this one. Again, I think, we'll get to, I think, our general thoughts right after this, but I think it is one of those seasons where you're going to have some really close games like this one. I think Kansas will have a chance to win it. It'll be Jalen Daniels' senior day. Maybe he pulls this thing out. But ultimately, as of this point, I think I like Utah in this one.
Man, yeah. I mean, this is another game where I didn't really have a hard time, thinking about this game. Like I said, really, to me, I look at, there's 3 games on the schedule that I circle and say, I truly, really don't know. It's K-State, it's Iowa State, we just got them talking about, and I think it is this Utah game for some of the reasons that you mentioned, in terms of where Utah may be at this point, where Kansas may be at this point, the physicality of Utah, how it may impact Kansas. Is there health concerns, for Kansas in any situation? So I originally thought I was going to pick Utah heading into, literally as we were starting to record, I was like, I think I'm picking Utah. But you know what? I can't quit on these boys. I'm going to pick. I'm flipping my pick live.
Roll Tide.
I'm flipping my pick live on the podcast as we're recording. I'm going to pick Kansas. I think this is another game where I look at it and I look at Jalen Daniels. It'll be his last game at Kansas. It'll be his last game in the booth. This is one where I turn to him and say, you don't want to lose this, man. You do not, same deal, sort of the same discussion with the K-State game we had. You do not want to walk off this field with a loss to end it, right? So I'm going to go with Kansas, but I don't feel great about it in any sense of the word. I think I'll go Kansas. Score prediction, I'll say 23-21 Kansas.
Yeah, I like the lower score on this one. So both of us had Kansas at 8-4.
Yep.
We had different ways to get there. Both of us had Kansas splitting its 2 rivalry games, but different ways of getting there. I had Kansas beating Missouri, but falling to Kansas State. You had Kansas falling to Missouri, topping Kansas State to end the streak in the booth. One thing, Nick, as we finish this up, just sort of a general thought for you. When you were going through all these games, did it stand out to you how many contests, like you were saying, were going to be sort of either coin flip or close games, to where the range of outcomes for Kansas is maybe 6-6 to 10-2, and you found yourself sort of at 8-4.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's a reflection of the general consensus around the Big 12 at this point.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about it earlier when there was some betting lines released on over-under win totals for Big 12 teams, and you had like 11 teams between 7 and 5 wins in terms of how many wins Vegas thought they might get. And absolutely, you know, I had them going 8-4. Look, they lose to Kansas State, they lose to Utah, 6-6. Like it's that easy, and it could happen like that. Like it could happen at the snap of a finger. That's possible. That, you know, those two games that I picked Kansas to win go the other way. But maybe they win against UCF, which obviously I picked them to lose against UCF. So
I was just say there were some the other way too, right? Where you picked Kansas to lose the game, but you didn't feel great about picking Kansas. Like it wasn't like you were sitting here saying, "Oh, there's no way that they win this game."
Yeah, because I mean, like, you know, going back to that Iowa State discussion we just had a few minutes ago, like, I would not be surprised if it's a late game, if it's a tie game or one possession game late, and Matt Campbell just absolutely fumbles the hell out of it, like he's done so many times before, and Kansas wins. Like that's possible too. So yeah, I think it's just an overall reflection of the state of college athletics right now and the chaos that it has, and with the transfer portal and it being, you know, that much more difficult to really predict where teams will be because of, you know, you're relying on transfers, you're relying on guys taking a step forward, whatever it may be. And then on top of that, I think the Big 12 is certainly the most volatile conference of the Power Four, I guess would be the best way to look at it. Certainly the most volatile conference. I mean, we saw it last year. Arizona State won the conference from being picked last. And I'm not saying that'll happen again this year, but the point being, there's so many different combinations of teams you could come up with to make the Big 12 title game, and it wouldn't shock me, right? If it's K-State and Utah, if it's Iowa State and KU, if it's Texas Tech and Utah, if it's Texas Tech and K-State, Texas Tech, you know, the combination of possible Big 12 title teams goes on and on and on. And so that is where I am simultaneously very excited for this season across the board, but also very nervous because it is not entirely out of the possibility that a couple of bounces don't go KU's way. Maybe there's some injuries here or there, and you could be looking at another season where Kansas misses a bowl game. Obviously, I hope that doesn't happen, but it's not out of the normal possibility by any means. It doesn't take that much imagination to envision a world where that happens. But it doesn't take that much imagination to envision a world where Kansas goes 8-4, 9-3, like both of us picked here today. So yeah, it's a reflection of the chaos that is going to be this conference, I think, and also just across the board in college athletics. But again, I'm excited for it, but also I'm going to be probably white knuckling it, I think, along with a lot of other KU fans some weeks as we go through this season.
Yeah, what's the John Rothstein thing? Bring your
grab your nitroglycerin pill.
Yeah, nitroglycerin pills. Yeah, exactly. That's going to be the Big 12 as a whole, but it is also, I think, going to be this Kansas season, and I'm interested too in that with so many moving pieces and new guys in the program and everything else. At what point does this team gel? And I think that's going to tell a lot too. Is it, you know, game 6 or 7 and it's like, okay, it's starting to come on now. Is it Missouri? Like, is this a team that comes together, you know, for a game like that? And then you've got confidence from starting off 3-0 heading into your first bye week. I think how quickly everything comes together for this team could also determine whether they get some of those bounces or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we just kind of finish up putting a bow on our season preview and we look forward to the season, I just want to say that I am very much looking forward to sharing the privilege of doing the show with you, Kevin, for the next 5 months or whatever it may be with KU. And I'm also extremely excited about what we've done so far with our community here on the paid podcast and on KCSN. And I feel a great sense of appreciation for those of you that have been with us maybe since the beginning of this journey that we started, you know, just over a year ago and through last season. And if you're somebody who's newer, we're happy you're here. And we hope that you spread the word about us, let people know that we're going to try to give you some of the best damn analysis we can on KU over the course of the next 4 to 5 months of KU season. And again, I would urge you, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, if you're on audio, also on our YouTube channel. And again, I've been saying it, but on our YouTube channel, we're going to be doing some live YouTube shows throughout the season. Certainly post-game, kicked around the idea of doing some live shows during the week, maybe during the season as well, to get some interaction with more KU fans as well. So I'll keep you posted on that. But certainly you can expect us to be live on YouTube after pretty much every KU game this season, breaking it down and giving our live reaction. So make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and turn on the notification bell so you know when we're going to be going live after games. And so I couldn't be more excited for it. Regardless of how the season goes for KU, obviously last year was a disappointment, but regardless of how it goes, I am feeling extra blessed to be doing this with you, Kevin, and having a chance to connect with the larger Jayhawk community as well.
Likewise. And this year, hopefully we can connect with some more people at the new booth and have a chance. And if you, by all means, if you guys see us on game day, say hi.
It's true.
We are not shy people. So if you want to walk over and tell us your opinions on KU football, we would love to hear it. We really appreciate you guys.
Yes, absolutely. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up the show for today. As a reminder, you'll want to be on the lookout tomorrow, Thursday afternoon, for our show reacting to day one of fall camp for Kansas. That'll kick off on Thursday morning. We'll have a show out on Thursday afternoon reacting to that. And again, you want to stay tuned to all of our coverage across social media, across our podcast on Apple and Spotify, and on YouTube for coverage of fall camp leading into the start of the season. But until next time, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.